Welcome to Coffee with TMEs, where we talk to Cisco's technical marketing engineers about the products and features that they're working on. I'm Jeff McLaughlin, Director of Technical Marketing here at Cisco. And I have a special guest with me today, Thomas Howard, who is a very experienced and knowledgeable TME who works on Identity Services Engine. And we're going to be talking about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, which is programmability and APIs. But before we get into it, I'd like to give Thomas a few seconds to introduce himself and let us know a little bit about how he became a TME.
Oh, how I became a TME. Wow. So that was a fun one. I actually started Cisco as a software engineer doing network management type stuff. And after about 5 years, I just got tired of life in a cube. And I just told my managers, like, is there anything else I can do that's not just, in a cube every single day doing software? And he's like, well, there's this marketing thing. And I said, I'll take it. And it ended up being technical marketing engineer role. And through that, I just loved being able to travel the world, go to Cisco Live, meet with customers and partners and things like that. And it's just, I've loved it ever since. So that's how I became a TME.
It's a bit ironic because we're going to be talking about software today, and a bit about your old programmability skills, but
it all comes back around.
That's a great intro, and that's definitely hitting some of the highlights of being a TME, and hopefully we'll be back to traveling to Cisco Live again very soon.
Please.
But if you know anything about ICE, if you've watched our webinars and all, you've probably seen Thomas more than once. So he runs webinars and is just a great presenter and educator on Identity Services Engine. And today we're going to be talking about some cutting edge technologies here, or new features for ICE that I think are very interesting. And ICE is a very widely deployed product. It's really a cornerstone of our security and policy strategy here at Cisco. It's a very popular product. It's been around for a while, and of course, we have ICE on a physical appliance. We have it in a VM form factor. Now we're moving into the cloud. We've also had API capabilities for a while on ICE. I remember working with the ERS APIs back in the day and PX Grid and all of this. So we're going to be talking about some of the newer developments in ICE, moving to the cloud, as I said, and programmability. So I guess, Thomas, maybe we could start the conversation. As I said, oh yes, I forgot to ask, do we have coffee? You have your coffee, good. This is Coffee with TMEs. So I always forget to ask that, despite the title of the program. So, one of the things, I did spend some time educating our customers, our salespeople about programmability. For a while, I was actually one of my areas of emphasis. And one of the things that I found was that in our industry, network engineers, security engineers, there's often a lack of knowledge about software, about basic programmability, about how APIs work. So I'm wondering if that's something that you found as well, and maybe your thoughts on how we address that.
Yeah, I see it every day where I get questions from our customers or partners that are hey, I need a script that'll help me do this on the guest portal, or I'm trying to play with Python and I need to know how to update a network device, something like that. And I find that they're just kind of looking for the answer as tell me how to do it, as opposed to really trying to understand or to kind of tinkering with some other examples that they maybe find online. And it amazes me because we just have so many resources out there on the internet today that if they just do a quick search, they'd probably find something on it. But yes, I think it's a change that's happening as things, everything's becoming software, right? Because it's just so much more flexible that way. And I think that our traditional network engineering background it certainly has its place, right? There's still a lot of things you need to know about the networking stack and all the protocols and how things work and get plugged together and all the new features that are coming out in switches and wireless and things. But nowadays it's really necessary for the provisioning of this stuff to do it at scale, to do it efficiently, to do it reliably, to understand how to do that with APIs. It's not just about the CLI anymore. And whenever I want to do a demo, the last thing I want to do is I have to go configure it manually, step by step by step. I absolutely want to do it in an automated way to minimize the boring stuff as I see it and get to the fun stuff after that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Like a lot of the things that we want to automate with APIs or other tools, like Ansible or something along those lines, these are repetitive tasks, and they're not exactly where we as engineers are adding value, right? I mean,
Right.
we want to kind of get through that and get to the more interesting stuff. Question for you. I mean, ICE. You mentioned software. ICE is obviously software. It has been software for a long time, and but I think engineers will tend to, just deploy the VM, bring it up, and then go to the GUI and start setting up their policies, doing whatever they need to in the GUI by hand, just point and click.
Right.
So I guess, and like I said, there have been APIs around for ICE for a while now. So I'm wondering, what APIs are there that have existed that customers can take advantage of? What new ones have been developed? And how can this benefit customers? Like, what could they actually do with these APIs that is easier than point and click?
Okay. So, as you said, we've had the ERS APIs, or Extensible RESTful Services APIs. Those are the ones that have been used to configure the different resources inside of ICE. Your network devices and users and network device groups and different things. That has all been there since, I think, go back to like ICE 1.3. So it's been there for like a decade. Then the newer stuff, which we just added, is really trying to go beyond the basics and give you the capability to actually provision ICE in a cloud environment. And those are built on the newer, the open API specifications, so that you can use those APIs with different tools to import and export things. And the idea there is we want to be able to take ICE not only from an appliance or a VM, but now into the cloud, and the ability to do that, quickly and efficiently, reliably with automation requires having these APIs to be able to provision an ICE node, do that initial setup and configuration, even turn on we have APIs to turn on the APIs, which is one that I personally love. And so being able to do that is really necessary. And once you have that, then it's just a matter of what problem are you trying to solve. Are you trying to configure something, deploy something? We even have stuff for doing patching and upgrades now. So you can imagine if we just had a log4j incident recently, and so if you wanted to be able to patch something quickly, if you had a way to quickly apply a patch, you say, here's the file, go patch it, run a script, and magically it hits all your ICE nodes.
Okay, so let me back up a little bit there. So one thing you mentioned was that ICE can be deployed in the cloud now, and these APIs are very useful for that. So maybe we should just talk about that for a minute.
Okay.
And I think I mentioned it earlier too, that you had the physical form factor and the VM, and now we can go to the cloud. So tell me a little bit about the ICE deployment in the cloud, what providers we support, how does it look? Do we support all the different node types that you have for ICE? How does that actually work?
Yeah, so today we do ICE in Amazon Web Services, or AWS. That's the main one. That's the most popular, and that's why we started with that one first. And the next version of ICE, ICE 3.2, we are going to be supporting a lot of the other ones, so Azure, Google Cloud, and OCI, Oracle Cloud. So those are the next ones we're looking to do. And the idea is that we want to be able to support, any of our customers, whatever environment they're trying to do. And then in terms of the instance types, so we have, just as you have different appliance sizes, like the 3615 through the 3695, you have different instance types or instance sizes that you can deploy. And there's different ones inside of AWS today. So we have one that's like a more evaluation type size. If you just want to go play with something, try to do a demo, that's the one I use all the time. It costs like 20 cents an hour to go run that. And if you want to just, fire up something real quick, go play with it, use it, it's quick and easy. But if you actually want to do a full-on production deployment, they have, I want to say it's the M5.4 extra large or something like that, and they have other ones above that as well. So it just depends on what capacity you need. You specify that. Amazon provisions it. You configure the ICE, and you're ready to start taking requests.
So one question that comes to mind, I mean, if you have ICE in an appliance or you're running it as a VM, it's going to be probably on-prem somewhere. Now we're pushing it out to the cloud. You have ICE needing to talk back to network devices that are on-prem. Like, how does that connection between the cloud and on-prem actually work?
Yeah, great question. So that one is really dependent on how the customer wants to do it. So there's lots of options that Amazon, for example, offers you to get something connected securely from their cloud to your data center or data centers, or your on-premise branch, whatever it happens to be. So you can actually configure a VPN endpoint inside of their virtual cloud. You can actually deploy like an ASA, a virtual ASA out there. You can deploy a virtual Meraki MX. That's actually one of the webinars that I did was Meraki and ICE, and I deployed ICE in AWS with a Meraki MX, a virtual MX, to automatically provide my VPN tunnel to my local branch here in my home lab. So that's something that you can do, and I'm sure there's other options that Amazon offers where you can do like local interconnects and all that kind of stuff. So how you do it is really up to you. And we get questions about this, like, oh, what's the best practice? It's like, whatever works best for you. I'm not going to tell you how to wire up your network. So it's whatever VPN you want to do to securely connect that virtual cloud into your environment. The only thing I say is, just make sure you use a VPN, because radius traffic, TACAX traffic, they are not encrypted. And so if you try to send those things over the open internet, anybody can take your password and local network details and quickly figure them out and go from there.
Good advice there. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. One of the other options is we have something called DTLS option for radius to encrypt that traffic. So that's something else I want to be able to provide an example for, is how people can do, if you did want to have something direct from a branch into AWS and not have to have a dedicated always on VPN, then that would at least be able to encrypt your traffic from the network device into ICE in the cloud.
Okay. So I want to get back to the APIs in a minute, but I have one more question about just deploying ICE in the cloud, which is, you raise the issue of the security of the radius traffic. I mean, we're taking something that is a security service. It's essential to the functioning of our network, and we're moving it out off of on-prem and out into a cloud provider. What's the advantage of that? Like, why do that? Why not just keep it on-prem, where I feel like I can control my security appliance and it's close to the devices it needs to talk to?
It's interesting. Speaking of networking and networking layers, it really, to me, it's layers 7, 8, and 9. And if you're not familiar with layers 8 and 9, I consider those to be the financial and the political.
Yep.
Whether you deploy it on site or in the cloud, I personally don't care. It's all the same to me. But personally, my preference has always been to do a virtual machine over an appliance, because I don't have to go into the lab to rack and stack this thing and then have a USB stick or a CD-ROM back in the day, whatever, to provision it. I can just have an ISO that I load onto my VMware or whatever my hypervisor is, and bring up an instance very quickly, as long as I've got all that hardware, that virtualized hardware that I can use. That's always been faster than having to go re-image or reboot a box in the lab.
Sure.
That assumes, of course, that you have all that unified compute infrastructure to run all your VMwares on. You've got the disk, you've got the RAM, you've got all the CPU and everything. If you don't, then of course you have to go purchase it. Then you got to rack and stack that, install the hypervisor on top of it, and then you can run your VMs. So there's a little bit of planning involved and some budgeting process, and it's got to be hosted somewhere. Maybe you've got an internal group that does that, or maybe you got to do it yourself. Depends on how your organization works. There's often politics involved in that, and the budget process and everything. Or if you got a credit card You get an Amazon account,
Yep.
and you don't have to rack and stack. You don't have to make sure you've got enough RAM and disk, and who else might be using that compute, and you're up and running in literally an hour in the cloud
Oh,
with your instances, with everything. So you have that flexibility, and it's fast.
okay. Yeah, that's definitely a good reason to do it, and the speed of execution is what's so great about the cloud, I think. Now, just going back to APIs, you mentioned that there are APIs to provision ICE in the cloud, and I guess the first question I have about that is, do those APIs interact with ICE, or do they interact with Amazon? I mean, I know ICE and Amazon both have APIs. Are these APIs to get the VM spun up, or to provision ICE, or sounded like maybe a combination of both? Like, how does that work? Which APIs are you referring to?
Yeah, both, all the above.
Okay.
For the example I gave earlier with ICE and Meraki and AWS, I needed to use the Amazon APIs in order to provision the ICE instance, the VPN, or the VPC as well that ICE lived in.
Yep.
I had to provision the Meraki VMX in AWS, but then I also needed APIs to go tell Meraki and their cloud dashboard API service. I had to go tell them, by the way, I need to create a network that's going to be for this virtual MX, and I had to provide an authentication token for that so that it would use it. I had to tell it what subnets were going to be remote in my VPN and what subnets were going to be local, so that it knew how to, from where it was okay to build the tunnel and to propagate the subnets between the two. And then once that was all connected, then I was able to actually turn on the APIs in ICE and do the configuration provisioning with those APIs inside of ICE.
Now, how did you call these APIs? I mean, it sounds like, to be honest, it sounds a little complicated. I mean, you mentioned several sets of APIs. Did you write like a Python script, or how did you actually connect to them to make that work?
Yeah, so I used Ansible, which is something I'm really loving because you don't actually have to code to use it.
Yeah.
It's something done. You actually, it's funny the way Ansible works is you write effectively their API function calls in a YAML file. They don't look like an API function call, like a Python script or JavaScript kind of function call, but that's what it is effectively. It has a name, and then it has a bunch of arguments that you specify, and with those arguments, you tell it, what you want to create or what you want to change, and then under the covers, Ansible is actually running on Python, and there's a bunch of Python modules that we supply that are actually written on top of a Python SDK that we have in ICE. And underlying that, it's actually calling those ERS APIs or the deployment APIs or whatever. And so we kind of wrap the ICE APIs inside of a Python SDK, inside of the Ansible module, which you can then use with a simple YAML text file.
Okay, then that's very interesting because my experience writing Python scripts, doing my own programmability experimentation. One of the hard things was that the APIs, even though they may all be REST-based, they're different, right? The way they're formatted, the types of parameters they expect you to pass and how you pass them varies quite a bit between different API systems. And what you're saying is, you can just create a YAML file for Ansible, and it's a pretty standard format. It's very human readable, right? Instead of writing a script, and so it actually takes that burden off of you and it puts it on the developers who write the modules for Ansible.
Yeah, it's really nice, and some people are like, well, why don't you use JSON? Like, well, you can use JSON, but you get comments. You can actually comment a YAML file. You can't comment a JSON file. So it sounds really stupid and trivial, but man, that's the number one reason to use YAML right there.
And YAML is required by Ansible, isn't it? Or do they allow other formats?
I want to say you can do JSON in there somehow. You have, like, when you do the output, you can actually do it in JSON or YAML format,
Okay.
or you can do conversions between the two. So but YAML is the basic way to do it because it's so much cleaner and simpler than doing a bunch of curly braces in JSON.
Okay, so we provide the modules for Ansible, so you don't have to worry about that. You can write your YAML file. Is there a reason to learn Python, JavaScript, or any other language, or can I just do it all in Ansible and forget about the hard part about learning to code?
Well, yeah, it sometimes it still helps to know the underlying code. So just this morning, I had a customer that sent me a second request because last week he sent me a request that was, hey, I saw your Python script in your GitHub repository and I tried to do it, but it's not working for me. Can you help me with this? So tried to help him out a little bit with how to create a network device. And then he wrote back today saying, hey, I tried it, but it was really kind of slow. How do I make it faster? And so if you're doing an Ansible call, you do have the ability to parallelize the calls, but that's when you actually have multiple things to configure. In ICE, you're only talking to a single policy administration node to do all your configuration for the REST APIs. And so what happens is each call is just like, it does one, like I'll just say one call per second, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not very fast. It can be a little bit faster. You can get a couple in for some things, but if it's creating a large object or something, it takes about a second to call. And so when he came back today, he was like, this is really slow. How do I make it faster? I'm like, well, in Python, now you need to go to the async IO calls. And that basically will let you do things in parallel really, really fast. And while one thing is waiting, it'll run another one, or like 10 or 20 or more at a time. And that's how you get that parallelization going on, and that's how you speed things up. And so, depending upon your need, right? If you're fine just to like hit enter, sit back, go get your coffee or go to lunch, whatever, and come back and something's done, and that's good enough for you, fantastic. But if your use case is you need to be doing, I don't know, config audits of your network devices or your ICE configs or something every day, and you've got tens of thousands of endpoints and network devices and different things, that may take hours upon hours to run all those audits, and maybe that's not fast enough depending on what you're trying to do, right? Or you're trying to get a bunch of changes in a certain window, and maybe there's just too many calls to do in that window of time, so you got to speed things up. And so that's where you might still need to be able to do a Python call instead, or parallelized with async IO or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great use case. I think the other thing with a tool like Python is if you're actually reading data from the APIs, right, and you need to do something with that data, parse it, and then take some other follow-up action, it becomes important to have a tool like Python where you can read in data and actually manipulate it and do something with it. And like one thing, fighting this battle in the past, I once did a blog post on the importance of learning programmability for network engineers, and I had this long response from a guy who was a CCIE, and he said, I got into network engineering so I wouldn't have to learn how to program. Like, that's not what I want to do. I want to be a network engineer. And one point I like to make is that you don't have to be a programmer, so to speak. Like you don't have to learn how to do device drivers at the operating system level or anything like that. In fact, you can even get pretty far writing really bad code. And some of the code that I've written, especially at the beginning, was pretty bad. I mean, most professionals would look at it and go, gee, that's not very well written. But two things. I mean, number one, that's fine. Most cases for scripting, you don't have to worry about optimization. It doesn't have to be super efficient. And number two, over time, you start to learn techniques. And you start optimizing your code and writing things better as time goes on. So, I think even a weekend course in Python, once you learn the tool, it's an investment that really pays off, and you start finding ways to use it too.
Yeah, so I use Python in a couple different ways. One obviously was just to be able to do ICE scripting, and before that, I manage the webinars, like you said. And so sometimes when you go through the registration data and find out, I want to be able to compute the survey results, what people thought of our webinars, right? And so there's actually a library in Python called Pandas that will allow you to basically do what I call scripted spreadsheets. Okay, so if I know that every month I gotta process these survey scores, and I gotta take it from multiple spreadsheets that I get out of WebEx, and then I want to be able to take these sheets, consolidate them, now go through them, process them, come up with averages, scores, and things like that. Yes, I can do it in Excel. It's not a big deal, but it's time. So if I can automate that, and I can do it in literally like 5 seconds with the Panda script, it's kind of cool. So if you can find something that you want to solve, with a script, it doesn't have to be ICE. It could be whatever problem you're trying to do, but just automate it a little bit. That can be fun. I've always programming to me has always just been a puzzle.
Yeah.
I love it because there's always an absolute answer, right? You can do it with programming. There's always going to be an answer. It may be really hard. It may take you a long time to figure out. There's a lot of stuff that goes into knowing it, but there's an answer out there if you just work at it, right? It doesn't matter how long it's going to take you to figure it out.
There's certain satisfaction when you crack that puzzle, right? And you make
oh my
things
God,
work.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just a puzzle. So as long as you're like, what is it, how am I going to solve this? That as long as you have that passion to figure it out, that's all that matters. And some people, they're like, I just want the answer. I don't want to, I hate this thing. I want to be done with it. It just depends on what you're trying to do.
Now, I know we discussed before we started recording that you could provide some resources and links, and we'll put them in the description. But let me just ask you for your advice in terms of learning programmability or programming in general, whether it's scripting or Ansible, what have you. Any advice you have or resources, and then for ICE specifically, are there resources you could point our listeners to?
Yeah. So what I have found is I've watched my fair share of YouTube videos, and what I've honestly found is that the libraries out there, the Python libraries, the Panda, whether it's Pandas or whether it's the requests library for doing the REST API calls or the AIO Python calls, those libraries have awesome documentation. And so if you have to watch YouTube videos, you may watch hours and hours to finally get that one nugget you were looking for, whereas they have excellent documentation in the library. So whatever libraries you're relying on, you can probably figure it out. And then whenever you get crazy errors, you're like, what the heck does this mean? I don't even know where to begin. I mean, literally copy, paste, Stack Exchange is your friend, It's stuff like that. So if you just try it out, I don't know everything by any means, but I just, use the internet, guys. That's what it's for. You're probably not the first person to have that problem. And
very true.
And It's rare that I ever come across that I'm the first person to have a problem.
And for ICE, are there any resources? I know you've probably done some webinars, documentation, collateral, anything that might be helpful for learning how to do some of the stuff we talked about, provisioning ICE and AWS, et cetera.
Yeah, so we've done the webinars, and those kind of give you the overview, and then of course I try to include a GitHub repository where we keep our code to show you exactly how to do all that and basically duplicate what we did with your own account, of course, not mine. So it does require that you have your own AWS account if that's what you want to be able to do. But a Python script you can run it on your Mac, you can run it on your Windows box with something like the Windows subsystem for Linux, or if you've got a Linux box, then it's really easy after that. So however you want to approach it, it should be pretty easy to do. I know we've had some of our other teams like Hosook actually did an amazing webinar showing how to provision a multi-node ICE deployment with digital certificates in AWS in basically an hour. It's so, when you see something like that happen, you're just like, oh my gosh, it took me days to get my ICE deployment up before the first time, right? But once you see that, you're like, wow, okay, I can really, this is where the automation is cool.
Definitely,
so, there's
big
lots of
plug
things out
for
there.
those webinars and the ICE YouTube channel, right? Where there's a lot of resources just if you look at the YouTube channel where this video is posted. So
yeah, and if you look in the show notes at the bottom, we always include Try to include the chapters. So if you want to skip ahead, the only part you care about, you got that. And also, if you look at the bottom, we always have the resources and repositories and things like that.
Now, I want to bring up the sometimes controversial question of certifications. Are there any certifications around, programmability or even cloud, AWS? I know they have a lot of certifications. I mean, are these valuable? Sometimes, it's just a piece of paper, but actually working through the curriculum itself, which is structured and designed to get you to a certain point of understanding. Like that's valuable in and of itself. Forget the piece of paper. But are there any certifications that you have or recommend for our listeners?
So I actually have no certifications, Cisco or otherwise. That's not true. I did get one for Azure, the basic cloud one.
I thought you had one. I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
So you have one.
Yeah, but I'm not a CCIE. I'm not even a CCNA. I've just always picked my stuff up along the way. Yeah. And it's something that I got my Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineering years ago, and I think you need things like that to get you in the door. A lot of places, right? If you don't have that background necessarily, like why should we trust you? How do we know? Right? It's good to say, here's my credentials. But after that, I found that I'm a lifelong learner. I don't think you can be someone in this industry at my age and not be a lifelong learner, because you're always having to learn new stuff all the time, right? And so I've always been able just to go be self-motivated to go learn new things and figure it out. So I don't mind going and doing that. But I've always done it with, whether it's router, switches, wireless, whatever. I just go and figure it out. Sometimes need the help of other people, obviously, but I do that. When it comes to programming, I've done it before, so I know the basics of how it works. So being able to at least know, your for loops and things like that, get a little bit of basic. You don't have to take a class. You could take a class, whether it's Udemy or whatever the course is, or hey, there's always YouTube, right? That's easy and free to learn those basics. But sometimes you just need to know enough to get the job done. Other times, the way I've treated it is I try to have a specific goal in mind, whether it's, being able to process my webinar numbers with a script, or whether it's being able to provision ICE in AWS with Ansible, whatever. If you have a project, it always comes down to a project. You got to have a goal in mind. And if you can do that, then you have something that you can demonstrably show someone and say, this is what I did, right? This is how I did it. You can go do it too, just like I did it. And what's really cool now is with sites like GitHub, you can post your code and say, look, this is what I did. And that shows people that you did it. You can share it. People then find you, come to you and say, hey, I'm trying to do something similar but different. Can you help me how that works? And so those are some of the options you have, I think, is you don't necessarily need a certification. Like I had to go to learn how to do ICE in Azure with Azure Active Directory. I did go out and get my certification for that, just to check that box, to make sure I knew like the cloud provider basics. But then AWS, I provisioned everything in AWS, and that was just like, okay, it's kind of like Azure. I did this one certificate, but okay, it's different. It's the same but different terminology. Yeah. But everything else I just learned, by reading the documentation and figuring it out, and that's how you do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point you raise. You don't need to go through those curriculums. I think it depends on what you're looking for and what your preference for just how you learn. I mean, some cases, you may have a recruiter that, they're not going to pick someone up unless they have an AWS certification. So you have to do it just for that, if that's what you're interested in. Or, sometimes your boss may require it. I think the other advantage is, if you need a structured curriculum, you're not the kind of person to go out and figure stuff out on your own, like you're talking about. Some people prefer that because, like you said, you can sign up for the Udemy video series and, you go through a curriculum. But you're right too. I mean, I don't have an AWS certification, but I've worked with AWS quite a bit. And for most of us, we learn by doing, right? And just getting your hands on is often all you need to do. If you have a specific challenge or project or task, just start doing it, and you'll be finding YouTube videos and online documentation and all that, and you'll pick up quite a bit of knowledge just by doing it.
Yeah, there's just so many things that we have to know as TMEs. We are the jack of all trades in so many ways. And so you
Yeah.
don't often have the luxury of getting a certification in all the different things that you need to know.
Yep. Yep. Well, we've covered quite a bit, Thomas, and I wonder, is there anything that we've left out, or anything else you'd like to cover before we go?
No,
You got it
I
all?
think this has been fun. Like I said, I love the coding aspect of things. I think it's just a puzzle. And so I've always enjoyed it, but having to write, like production shipping code, that hasn't always been my thing.
Yeah.
And supporting it and filing and getting bugs filed against it, that's not always fun. But scripting's great. It's easy. You get the job done, move on, try something else, get to dabble in different things. So I've always loved that. So I think it's a lot of fun. So I just encourage people to go out and try it.
I agree with that,
And
and a lot of the scripts that I've written, I'll present at Cisco Live or something, and customers will say, "Can you share the code in GitHub?" And I'm thinking, "Oh boy, I really don't want to share that code because it's kind of ugly." But you're right, like I don't have anyone judging it. I don't have bugs filed against it. I get it to work and it works. And not
right,
saying it's the best. I want to improve, but if it works, it gets the job done. Hey, I can improve it later.
yeah,
Um, so some great advice from you, Thomas, on both getting into programmability, scripting, cloud, learning more about software, as well as some specifics about Identity Services Engine, some of the new features, the ability to deploy it in Amazon and other cloud providers soon, as well as the API capability. So I encourage everybody to take a look at the links that Thomas will provide in the description. Educate yourself, learn more about programmability, scripting, and cloud. It certainly will benefit you in your job as well as in your career, because these are skills that are highly in demand, especially for network and security engineers. So thank you, Thomas, for your time. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
thank you, Jeff.
And thank you for listening and watching, and I'll see you next time on Coffee with TMEs.